Well, good afternoon. Today is a pretty big day in the Minnesota House of Representatives. We anticipate that House Files 8 and 9 will be moving out of the Public Safety Committees and forward in the process. This is the first time I can remember the Minnesota House of Representatives moving forward gun violence prevention legislation. And really, this situation has come about because of the relentless advocacy of young people in particular since Parkland. They refused to let things continue as they had been, with no action being taken by elected officials all over the country. So not only did they advocate here at the Capitol in 2018 aggressively, but they also hit the campaign trail, and they created a political reality where moving forward on gun violence prevention is possible in the Minnesota House of Representatives. So we're very fortunate to have Ryan Winkler, a strong leader, as majority leader on the House floor when these bills get to the House floor, and two absolutely fantastic authors, Representative Dave Pinto and Representative Ruth Richardson.
Good afternoon. Minnesotans deserve to be safe. They deserve to be safe at school, at work, at movie theaters, at places of worship, at concerts, and in public spaces. There are those who say that we can't do anything to resolve this problem, but we reject that notion. House File 8 and 9, universal background checks and red flag bills, will pass the Minnesota House of Representatives this year. We are committed to making a difference. These are common sense gun violence prevention measures, and the time has come to make those bills the law of the state of Minnesota. And I look forward to moving forward tonight in committee with the terrific authors. We are working broadly with a wide set of stakeholders, trying to, as much as we possibly can, make this bill reflect the concerns of people who want to make them be successful. The bill authors have worked very hard on them. They are ready to go. There will be a long hearing tonight, but at the end of this process, we will have a vote and we will move these bills forward. And we'll take questions.
What's the next stop after this committee?
It's Judiciary, right?
Judiciary.
Yeah, Judiciary Committee.
Correct.
What about the Senate? How are you doing there with your Senate co-authors, leadership? Where are the discussions at this point?
Want to grab that?
Sure, we haven't really started talking about it with the Senate to get their agreement to move these bills through, but when you look around the country, there's action being taken in states all across the country, places where they have Republican leadership and Democratic leadership, states like Florida with really a considerable, strong majorities of Republicans in their House, their Senate, and their governor move forward on gun violence prevention. And so I think it's just a different moment in our history, and I'm hoping that the Minnesota Senate is ready to acknowledge that and take action.
Would you want it brought into global negotiations, or should this stand alone?
Well, we'll see. We will be sending House Files 8 and 9 over to the Senate, and we'll see if they hear those bills in committee, as they should, as Minnesotans are demanding that they do, and if they move those bills through across the Senate floor. If that isn't successful, that they go to conference as standalone bills, they will be a part of the budget negotiations.
Any Republicans on board with this in either chamber?
I'm not aware, so Representative Dave Pinto, I am not aware of Republicans that have signed on as authors. I should note you're going to be hearing tonight from health professionals, you're going to be hearing from law enforcement leaders from across Minnesota, and I expect that once the hearings have occurred tonight and beyond, that we're going to be seeing an increasing number of folks from across the spectrum, and I would certainly hope Republicans as well, recognizing how reasonable these are and just the broad support that they have. So right now we're still waiting Republican support, though.
Do both of you have authors' amendments that'll be heard tonight that substantially alter either bill?
There's an amendment. There are amendments to both bills. I'll talk about the House File 8, which is the criminal background checks. My colleague Representative Richardson is authoring the other bill. Yeah, there will be an amendment that will be discussed tonight that makes some changes. It's a result of some extensive discussions with a broad variety of stakeholders. And again, you're going to be hearing in particular from law enforcement leaders tonight, as well as others. And so, but the heart of that bill remains the same, which is requiring that when there is a transfer from a private seller to a private purchaser, that there really should be a criminal background check. Minnesotans are demanding that, and that's what the bill provides.
Can you give us a breakdown of what we can expect at the hearing tonight?
Sure. So at the hearing tonight, you're going to hear House File 8 first that Representative Pinto is carrying. And it's going to, there's a number of testifiers that are going to be coming along with him, including law enforcement, people with lived experience, and students as well. There's going to be time for those who are opposed to the bill to speak as well, and also time for amendments and questions. And that same sort of process will occur with House File 9.
So victims' family members will be there?
Correct.
How optimistic are you that that whole process will play out, starting at 7 and ending until whenever? How late might people go?
It's, I mean, it's certainly going to go pretty late tonight. We'll see how it works. We have a very good chair in Carlos Mariani, Representative Mariani, leading the committee. And he's laid out a very fair plan, as Representative Richardson says. We're going to hear from proponents, hear from opponents, and so we'll see how it goes. But I would expect, having been involved in the hearing last spring, that it's going to be a civil, productive discussion, but do expect that the bills are going to be moving out. But it'll be a late night.
President Pinto, at today's earlier press conference, Representative O'Neill suggested that the 72-hour hold is sufficient to the situation, that the red flag warning or extreme risk bill isn't needed. How do you respond to that? It seems to me a 72-hour hold is no easy thing to get lined up.
Well, my response would be that we have a crisis in the mental health system, and if you are looking for a bed for a 72-hour hold right now, there are not beds available. And so ensuring that if we want to ensure that we have options when those beds aren't available or people are being moved out of those holds more quickly, there's also challenges just in terms of psychiatrists. We have a shortage. Nurses, we have a shortage, mental health professionals as well. So there are real challenges within our mental health system. And so this red flag law gives another option to families and law enforcement.
Don't you need to essentially be already in a hospital or under arrest in order for a 72-hour hold to even be part of the process?
Well, typically what happens with a 72-hour hold, if someone comes into an emergency room, for example, if there's a threat of suicide, typically in those emergency room holds, they're going to call to see if there are beds available throughout the state. And what we see happening is there are oftentimes not beds available. And this is also a real issue within rural communities as well, because we have people calling all the way from Roseau trying to get beds here because there's just a lack of them across the state.
Can we get your name, please?
Representative Ruth Richardson.
There was also concerns raised today that perhaps the opponents who might have testified had not yet gotten notice as to whether or not they were able to. Has that been resolved?
Well, so just to be perfectly clear, this bill, this committee has been noticed for a long time. There were 2 school districts willing to have hearings in the community to hear about that. They received a huge number of requests to carry guns into schools for the hearings. They received data practices requests, and they were overwhelmed by requests to allow people to carry guns into the schools. They backed out. We noticed on Saturday that the meeting would be held tonight at the state capitol at 7 o'clock at a time requested by the Republicans. The Republican staff first requested that the hearing be divided between opponents and proponents, and each side would get to decide which testifiers would be in which part. Then there was a disagreement within the Republican side, and they said instead they want first come, first serve. Our staff had kept a list of first come, first served requests, and so then we decided that if that's how they wanted to do it, we would do it their way on that regard. So any complaint about the process for hearing is entirely generated by the opponents of the bill and their own efforts to divert our initial plans, and second of all, their cross messages amongst themselves about how they want us to do this.
Mr. Leader and Madam Speaker, Majority Leader of the Senate could have hardly have been clearer. He said, "Ain't gonna happen," I think were the words over the weekend. He reiterated that today, that these bills aren't going anyplace in the Minnesota Senate. How do you change that climate?
Well, the question is Senator Gazelka going to listen to Minnesotans? Is his caucus going to listen to Minnesotans? When we have the hearing tonight, we will hear Minnesotans speak about this legislation. And we've heard them ever since the Parkland shootings being relentless in their pursuit of gun violence prevention measures. So I think that Senator Gazelka will ultimately be persuaded by the Minnesotans who step forward at the hearing tonight and tell their stories about why this legislation is important to them. You know, one thing that I find to be a real shame is that what we tried to do was to bring these hearings to the high school communities who were so mobilized and so active. This is really their legislation. This is really their political moment that they created. And we have folks out there who decided that the one thing they just can't tolerate is being in this space with all these high schoolers, in the high schoolers' own space, you know, and that they absolutely couldn't be in that space without carrying their firearms to these hearings. The fact that they bullied 2 different school districts out of hearing a bill in the community with the students who worked so hard to get it there, I think is just really a shame. And it speaks volumes to some of the lengths that some of the opponents will go to try to intimidate people who support this legislation.
I would just add one thing to that. If Senator Gazelka would have hearings in committee and bring these bills to a vote on the floor of the Senate, I think the outcome might be different. And I think the bills would have the votes to pass. The question is whether they have the courage to have the Senate actually vote on it.
Do you have any way of bringing the political pressure to bear, given that they're not up for re-election this fall?
Well, they are up for election in 2020, and I think that folks who know that they're going to be on the ballot soon listen to voters at a greater level of intensity than they do when they're not about to be on the ballot. You know, in the Minnesota House of Representatives, we're very close to the electorate because we're always on the ballot. And so I think that there is definitely going to be a lot of pressure within the Senate Republican caucus from those in particular who represent suburban communities who are very, very clear that they want action on this issue.
This is happening on the same day that the U.S. House voted to approve a background checks bill. Is the timing any coincidence?
It is coincidence.
But the one good thing is this will go late tonight, but committees can't meet past midnight. So, you know, it won't go past midnight. It will end at 11:59 p.m.
Do you think you'll have a vote before then?
Well, I think that the Chair Carlos Mariani has a fine line to walk here, right? Is to make sure that everyone feels heard, to make sure that the time is divided equally between the proponents and the opponents, but to ultimately move the legislation forward and not allow the opponents to simply be an obstacle to progress. So I think that he will certainly be able to get at least one of them through. And if he has the feeling that you know, they need another evening of hearings tomorrow to finish up, then they'll take that. But I think he's got a very good plan to give everyone a fair opportunity to participate in the hearings, and I think it's certainly conceivable that they could vote both out tonight.
One thing we hear continually is that these crimes are being conducted by people who obtain their firearms illegally, and as near as I can tell, that's based on a 2004 Johns Hopkins prison study. Do we know if there's any more up-to-date information, and is that true?
Well, I mean, there's lots of statistics, different ways. I guess what we know is that the background checks that are currently happen through licensed dealers, so there are background checks required for those purchases. Those background checks stop thousands of prohibited purchasers every year. So that's through a route where there are the background checks. They're already being stopped there. We know then that there are, I think I saw another study, 80% of prohibited purchasers purchasing through some kind of private transaction, private transfer. And we've got a number of incidents we can point to. What we know is that we can make a difference in reducing the number of people who are dangerous, who are in possession of firearms. We'll reduce to zero. No one measure will do that, but absolutely can make a difference. And we've seen that in the more than 20 states that in fact have criminal background checks. They have lower rates of gun death from a variety of sources, et cetera. So this change can make a difference.
How many prohibited purchases do you think you can stop with private sale background checks?
Well, I mean, I'd say I can't give you a specific number right now, right? We know that there are folks who are There are people who are convicted of violent felonies, domestic abusers, and others that are currently prohibited from possessing firearms. There's no change in that. And the question is, are we going to allow this route, this very simple route for them to purchase through private sales with absolutely no background check to confirm that in fact they would be eligible or not eligible to purchase? And that's the thing that we're focused on.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.